Let's jump right into the Houston Texans at the Pittsburgh Steelers, as I mentioned we would in story number 1 this past week in the news and notes section. Let's jump right into this game. This was a game, as I mentioned before, where it was really determined 100% by turnovers. The Houston Texans had 2 fumbles lost and an interception. 2 of those turnovers were when they were back deep in their own territory. They gave the Steelers the ball on the 8-yard line and the 3-yard line. Obviously, the first one was an Arian Foster fumble. He got the ball there near his goal line, fumbled it on his 3. Pittsburgh Steelers, it was reviewed. It wasn't initially called a fumble. It obviously was definitely a fumble, and the Steelers ran into the end zone. The second one was a tipped pass that then deflected off a helmet and then was tipped again, and then Brett Kiesel caught it, ran it back to the Houston Texans 8-yard line, and they scored a touchdown. Both of these occurred moments before the first half ended, a half that was at least through the first 17 or 18 minutes totally dominated by the Houston Texans. It wasn't even a close back and forth. It was just domination. Then the Steelers got close, had a great play towards the end of the half, and scored a touchdown, and then had this barrage of turnovers into touchdowns. But you look at the stats of this game, and you can really see why I think the Texans played a very good game overall and did a lot of good things to hold down the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you think about it, Houston Texans, they were better in terms of yards per pass, 8.2 yards per attempt versus 7.4 from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Keep in mind, think about all the big plays the Steelers had downfield, bombs into the end zone, big screen passes and things of that nature that gained tons of yardage. Le'Veon Bell was going nuts, and yet they still only had 7.4 yards per attempt, whereas the Houston Texans were up at 8.2. You look at yards per rush. The Houston Texans ran for 4.4 yards per rush. That was 8th best. Held the Pittsburgh Steelers in that ground game, which has done very well against a number of opponents, to just 3.0 yards per carry. That was the 4th worst of any team in the league this past week. One of the keys I felt in the game was, even though it was a 24-13 lead, and the Steelers were actually up by 2 touchdowns at one point there in that game, I think that the Houston Texans got away from running the ball a little bit too quickly. But at the end of the day, they still did perform quite well. If you want to look at the scoreboard itself, obviously we know that the Houston Texans had a lead in the first half. They were up 13-0, and the third quarter was scoreless. There were a number of opportunities for both teams that just went by the wayside. And then the Houston Texans outscored the Steelers 10-6 in the fourth quarter. So they outscored the Steelers in the first, 18, 19 minutes of the game. They outscored them the whole second half of the game. There's a few minutes, this barrage there at the end. Now, if you look at some of the more advanced metrics, you can see that reflected as well. In terms of early on success rate, the Texans had 20 first downs, the Steelers only had 18. The Texans only went to third down 12 times. The Steelers went to third down 14 of their 18 times. So a better early down success rate for the Houston Texans. Houston Texans punted it less than the Pittsburgh Steelers did, had a better overall yards per play than the Pittsburgh Steelers did, had fewer penalties than the Pittsburgh Steelers did. They sacked Ben 3 times. Fitzpatrick was only sacked once. So this is a game, you take away those turnovers, even one of them, I think the Texans are walking out of there with an outright victory. But you add them all in there, and that gave you the result. So these are things that you need to look at when you're planning ahead to the upcoming week in terms of looking at games and seeing where you're going to go with your bets and that sort of thing. If you look at the Houston Texans, again, I do not have this team as a very strong team. The question becomes really a matter of motivation at this point in time. They dropped a game in overtime to Dallas. Then they dropped a close game at the end to the Indianapolis Colts. Both of those teams are going to make the playoffs. That's no question. This game here against the Steelers, they actually get a lead. This is not a great Steelers team. They probably should have won the game, but on account of their own mistakes, they end up literally throwing the game away. And now the Houston Texans are probably right about only 12% likely to make the playoffs. So even with a win this week, they would have only been about 28% likely, but they really cut that percentage in half. We'll have to see what the exact numbers come out to, but it's going to be a challenge for the head coach now to get the Steelers on get the Texans on a short week to get fired up to go play the Tennessee Titans. And so it's going to be a real challenge. He was obviously very fiery in his post-game speech, but I 100% agreed with everything that he said. You saw him yelling about the fact that there's not a moral victory. It sucks to lose, but if you think about it, if they recover that onside kick, they have a chance to tie this game. After all of that ridiculous stuff that happened to him, all those turnovers that people on both sides of the ball, you ask like Antonio Brown, you ask Le'Veon Bell, you ask Ryan Fitzpatrick, have they ever seen anything like that there? And so many touchdowns scored at the very end off those turnovers. None of them had ever seen that before. So it's very abnormal for that type of situation to happen. How does that affect this team in terms of their motivation, their psyche heading into their next game, and with their coach having to try to defend their performance and try to encourage them through a lot of dumb decisions? And Ryan Fitzpatrick, yeah, he's got the Harvard degree, but he only really, and I get down on Fitzpatrick often, but he really only had one of those interceptions. The fumble by Foster was a dumb decision. The interception by Fitzpatrick, it was probably stupid that they were even calling the passing play in that situation. They know Fitzpatrick is not the most careful of quarterbacks. The interception was obviously rather fluky, like multiple tips off of a helmet and back to the Steelers player, but those things happen, and so you just can't risk throwing it in that spot. And the fumble by the receiver, he catches a deep pass, he's like around midfield. All they need to do is score a touchdown there. I think you go for 2, and they're a field goal away. They're covering the game at that point, and he fumbles it. So obviously that really cost the team badly. So I don't really want to say this is like a Ryan Fitzpatrick turnover fest. That's not the way this game ended up playing out, which is why it's even more fluky because of those fumbles from guys who are, like especially Arian Foster, not accustomed to really fumbling the ball. Historically not a problem for him. Let's move back up now to the top of the sheet for all the clients. You guys have the sheet here that we walk through all these games with. top of the game, let's go to Thursday night. Patriots, the Jets. I really had to do a double take at this. The Jets had the most first downs of any team this week. They had 28 first downs in this game. They had the third best third down conversion rate of any team this week. They had 5.1 yards per rush. That was the fifth best yards per rush of any team this week. They only punted it 3 times. They had the biggest time of possession of any team this week at 41 minutes. Patriots only had it for 19. These are statistics that, after watching that game, granted it was Thursday, I certainly don't remember thinking that the Jets are being so dominant in this game. I obviously saw the game that was close. I saw a game that the Patriots had very narrow leads throughout most of the game, a 1-point lead after the first quarter, a 5-point lead at halftime, a 1-point lead after the third quarter. They obviously won only by 2 points, but it really was a great performance by the New York Jets. Obviously, Geno Smith, I get down on him often for what I perceive as both lack of focus, lack of awareness or on-field intelligence and decision-making and pushing the ball down the field and accuracy and those sorts of things. And in this game, he really didn't do anything there to wow me. 59% completions, that's not very good, 21st in the league. 6 yards per pass attempt, that was 19th in the league. That's not very good. When you have only 200 yards passing and it takes you 34 attempts to do that, that's obviously not very good. But the best thing about Geno Smith in this game that kept it close was no turnovers, no interceptions, no fumbles. And that's what allowed this ground game to really carry the Jets. They ran about 43 times, gained 218 yards. It's 5.1 yards per carry. That controlled the time of possession. That kept Tom Brady off the field. And both teams went 2 of 4 in the red zone. So we know the Jets really struggled in the red zone, and they did. But their defense holding Tom Brady to only 50% in the red zone certainly is strong. That defense held Tom Brady and the Patriots to the 6th worst early down success rate of the week. And when you look at some of the statistics for Tom Brady, he only completed 54% of his passes. 7 yards per attempt, 103 passer rating because he had 3 passing touchdowns and no interceptions. But very surprising performance for the Jets, and obviously a game that the Patriots are certainly lucky that Nick Folk didn't hit that field goal at the very end there, and they could go home with a victory now 5-2 and a win over another division opponent. Certainly a very solid outcome for the Patriots any way that they get it, but impressed by what the Jets did. Jumping down to the Bears versus the Dolphins, this was a total domination, and when you look at these numbers on the sheet here, you can see why Brandon Marshall probably had every right to be disappointed with the quarterback production in this game. Obviously, teams go as far as their quarterback can take them for the most part. If your quarterback avoids having a horrible game, horrible turnovers and that type of thing, if you have any type of defense, if you have any type of run game at all, you could stay in those games. In this game here, Jay Cutler, 5.1 yards per attempt. He only passed for 172 yards on 34 attempts. Okay, that's not very good whatsoever. 72 passer rating. That was 26th in the league this past weekend. He threw 1 interception. The team had 2 other turnovers. And then you look at some of the advanced metrics for the game. I mean, early down success rate, they were only 25th in the league out of 30 teams that played. You look at the yards per play, they were 27th in the league. So they just could not get anything going on third downs. They did convert 42%, which is not great, but it's not horrible either. They just were getting into far too many third down attempts out of their 14 first downs, which is very small. That was 4th worst in the league this past week. They went to third down 14 times. So that's not a very good ratio. Now, they got into the red zone 3 times, converted touchdown twice. But the Dolphins, let's look at them. They got into the red zone of the Bears 6 times, converted for 3 touchdowns. Left some points there. Even this game could have even been more out of hand had they converted 4 out of those 6 instead of just 3 out of the 6. And guess what? The Dolphins only made 2 out of their 4 field goals, too. So there's another 6 points that easily could have potentially been up on the scoreboard at the end of this one, pushing their point total over 30 points against these Bears. The Dolphins controlled time of possession, again, 37 minutes to the Bears' 23 minutes. So that was a very solid performance, and the Dolphins only punted twice. So up and down the field, I think this was a very strong outcome for the Miami Dolphins, offensively and defensively. They dominated the Chicago Bears, and it showed up on the scoreboard. Obviously, they were up by 14 points at halftime and never relinquished that lead. So it was a very, very strong start to finish for the Miami Dolphins last weekend. Moving to the Bills versus the Vikings, this game here, both of these teams sort of did not want to win this game is what it appears like to me. 17 points for the Bills. They scored that very last-second touchdown to take the lead. The Vikings put up 16 points. If you look at some of these statistics, 6 total turnovers. The Bills turned it over 4 times. They lost 3 fumbles. The Vikings turned it over twice. Teddy Bridgewater threw 2 interceptions. So, this just was a very, very sloppy game. You look at the number of punts. There was 11 total punts in this game. And the one thing that teams could not do, this is a similarity, they could not really pass the ball, but they could sure as hell run the ball. If you look at let's look at the Vikings. Bridgewater, a very terrible 4.5 yards per attempt. That was 3rd worst in the league this past weekend with his 2 interceptions. His passer rating was only at 50. That's 28th in the league. But you look at what they did on the ground, running the ball, 29 rushes for 158 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, 3rd best. The 1st best team in rushing yards per carry was the Buffalo Bills. They ran for 6.2 yards per carry against this Minnesota Vikings defense. And the quarterback, Kyle Orton, a very, very efficient 31 of 43. That's a 72% completion rate, 7th best in the league. But you can't turn the ball over that many times. And they only got down to the Vikings red zone 3 times. They only got 1 touchdown out of that. So it was just a bad performance by both teams. I thought just very sloppy. That's all you can really say about this game here. Jumping down to the Broncos and the 49ers. this game was just a total domination from start to finish for the Denver Broncos. And I know that a lot of the sharper guys were liking the 49ers' chances here. I didn't see it, and that's why I just teased the Denver Broncos for an easy victory. Peyton Manning posting a 153 passer rating, 11.3 yards per pass attempt. When you look at this 49ers defense, again, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. That's why I'm glad you guys are paying attention and taking your notes and using this to apply to things for the future. I told you that the 49ers defense is not back. Some people were saying that they were back, and people were really believing that they were back after they got 5 sacks on the St. Louis Rams in the second half there to shut down Austin Davis in that passing game. They seem to forget that in the first half, Austin Davis threw the ball all over them and jumped out to a very quick lead. Just because they figured out some ways to get pressure on him in that second half, suddenly people thought this defense was back. They can get pressure on the quarterback and all this type of thing. They got no pressure on Peyton. They did sack him twice, which is obviously better than average, but it came few and far between. Peyton Manning had only 4 incomplete passes out of 27 passes that he threw. That's a ridiculous completion percentage, a ridiculous yards per pass attempt, ridiculous passer rating. Obviously, he threw 4 passing touchdowns. So the same number of passing touchdowns as incompletions. Actually, he threw 1 more incompletion. He had 5 incompletions, 4 passing touchdowns, 2 running touchdowns added onto that for a total of 6 on the day. They went 3 for 3 inside that 49ers red zone. Again, one of the issues with the 49ers, which I have said in the past and I'll say again, they struggle in the red zone. They went 1 of 3 against the Broncos. You are not going to win games, particularly in Denver. One of the reasons why I did not like the Arizona Cardinals when they played the Broncos the other week. Those 2 teams just cannot score in the red zone. And against the Denver Broncos, you really need to be able to score in the red zone, and they could not do it. And they didn't even come close to winning the game, obviously losing 42-17. If you look at the 49ers, they came out very pass-heavy. And I'm sure everybody wanted them to try to establish the run. Certainly in my mind, as I was sitting here trying to think of how could the 49ers win this game? And in particular, that game in primetime with Peyton Manning trying to break the record. And I came up with a game plan for the 49ers, which really involved sitting back and almost asking Peyton to run it for 5 yards a carry. Hand the ball off to Hillman, let him gain 5-6 yards a carry. Keep Peyton Manning frustrated without getting his passing touchdowns, without getting his scores, and extend the game, rather shorten the game. The clock's ticking. Peyton's not gaining 20, 30, 40-yard plays at a time. There's much shorter gains. And then when you have the ball, you try to run it and use high-quality, high-rate plays that can keep your offense out on the field for the 49ers to prevent Peyton from getting back out there. The problem with the Broncos this year, using that type of game plan, at least from what it appeared on Monday and some glimpses of it in the past, is their run defense, particularly up the middle, is really strong. And so the 49ers only ran for 3.4 yards per carry, only 62 total rushing yards on 18 handoffs. So naturally, I think from the get-go, Harbaugh wanted to go with a passing-oriented attack, and it looked okay at the beginning. I mean, in the first half, they were really moving the ball. Colin Kaepernick posted a lot of yardage there in the first half, and they were executing well. They just weren't converting down inside the red zone. Again, the problem that I mentioned with them, but they were moving the ball through the air with the pass. So clearly, they were not trying that game plan that I mentioned, and I don't think that would win the 49ers the game a large percentage of the time, but it's certainly, I think, worth a shot as opposed to the game plan they went in there with, which is let's just try to have a shootout between Peyton Manning and Colin Kaepernick, and we're just going to play straight-up defense and hope Peyton Manning doesn't beat us with the pass. I mean, that's a losing game plan the vast majority of the time compared to the one that I was envisioning that they potentially could try that would in fact have made a 49ers and under play a little bit more palatable. But on a low total of 47.5 at one point, and with the Broncos favored by 7, it was just the perfect square teaser on the board there to take the Broncos in the over, fading the quote-unquote sharp side and just rolling with the public, and Peyton on that one ended up being the easiest way to go with that one. But certainly it's going to be interesting to watch these Denver Broncos host the San Diego Chargers. The Chargers know how to play the Denver Broncos. They keep things very competitive, so I can't wait to see their game on Thursday night. Speaking of the Chargers, let's talk about their game versus the Chiefs. This was a game I share these plays with my clients, but one of the plays this week, it was the first one that I officially shared with them as part of my early on success rate model. I built a model that highlights early on success rate edges, and this was one of the strongest plays of the season, and so I decided to call that out directly and share that as a play, and also used it in the teaser. So we were invested on the Chiefs in a couple different ways in this game, and the Chiefs really played extremely well in this spot. If you look at what the quarterback did, Alex Smith, in terms of his efficiencies, again, nothing's going to jump off the board and slap you in the face. He doesn't do anything so creative, so ridiculous in terms of his yards per pass attempt or his completion percentage or his passer rating. But in this game, he was typical Alex Smith. Higher completion percentage, 68%, very good, 7.5 yards per attempt, no interceptions, and 102 pass rating. That's a solid stat line against the San Diego Chargers defense, and it was more than enough to get them the victory. Now, the interesting part about this game was the Chargers shut down the run game of the Kansas City Chiefs, held Jamal Charles and company to only 3.9 yards per carry. That did not stop the Chiefs from continuing to pound the run. They ran it 39 times. The Chargers only ran it 16 times. The Chiefs ran it 39 times, controlled time of possession, had the ball for 39 minutes compared to 21 for the San Diego Chargers. And when they got to third down, which they didn't have a very good early down success rate, 16th in the league. So they got to third down just over average amount of times, and they completed 50%. They converted 50% of those third down attempts. So very, very strong efficiency there on third down, kept them on the field. When they eventually traveled into the red zone on these longer drives, they went 2 of 3, 67% in the red zone. Defensively, they held Phillip Rivers to 55% completions, which is bad for Phillip Rivers for sure. 26th in the league this past week, and only 5.9 yards per attempt and an 80 passer rating because he did have 1 interception to go with his 2 passing touchdowns. But I think let's go ahead and talk about one trend that we're seeing emerge. That is teams realizing, I think over the last couple of years, we've seen this a little bit more than prior years, that simply quick strike touchdowns every single time off the field is not necessarily the most efficient, easiest way to win games. It might sound like it is, but the reality is, if you can just control that clock and keep your defense healthy and fresh and score points, you might not have 35 on the board. You might only have 27, or 24, let's say. But you are keeping that opponent off the field. And so they don't even have the opportunity, really, to outscore you because of their lack of time possession or their lack of total possessions. So I think we're seeing more and more teams that maybe don't have the supreme defenses. And again, we're talking about teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, the Miami Dolphins. It's a game plan that I think the Jets obviously could use. We can't dismiss the Dallas Cowboys. That's the way that they're keeping that defense looking so good. A lot of these teams now with mediocre defenses are finding that we can simply be very efficient offenses that control the clock and force these other teams into spots that they don't want to be in, which is every single play matters a lot more because you get so few plays per game when the other team has the ball for so long, that little mistakes get magnified and pressure is on to put up points and drive the ball down for touchdowns or field goals every single time you have it. And that puts teams in precarious situations. So definitely something to pay attention to going forward, but I think we're seeing that more and more this season where teams are figuring out ways to win with what they've got. And I love that creativity from the coaching staff. I love those mental games where they're trying to figure out ways around some of their weaknesses by camouflaging them, by using other positional skill areas. The offense is going to actually help the defense in our game this week. We're going to help our defense, and I think that's tremendous. And I wish more coaches would be creative like that. And it doesn't just simply have to be controlling the clock, using ball control, shorter passing game, and running the ball. There's a lot of different ways coaches need to be more creative in what they try to implement on a week-to-week basis to gain an advantage over their opponent. I think that they leave so much out there that could be utilized and could be explored in terms of attacking opposing deficiencies and being a lot more creative. We saw a great example when we get to the St. Louis Rams Seattle Seahawks game with that special teams fake punt return. That was just brilliant from a coaching staff, noticing tendency on film, understanding how they could attack that and confuse the opponent. And that one play pretty much changed that whole dynamic of the game. It went from being a drive that the Seattle Seahawks were going to pin back the St. Louis Rams to a quick touchdown. And everybody could get a touchdown on a punt return or something like that and have it be a deflating moment for that team who just gave that up. But to catch them in a trick play like that adds to that deflating moment. It adds to that sense of disparity on the field from that team. It adds to that lack of confidence, like, wow, did this really just happen to us? This just must not be our day. And it's not to say they're not going to come back and continue fighting, but from playing sports competitively through college, I can tell you that, mentally, as I'm sure you guys know as well, things like that do factor into your brain as you're sitting there playing the game. You're not 100% a robot out on the field there. You play with emotion, and that does factor into it. So kudos to the coaches who are actually trying to be innovative, and shame on the guys who are too conservative and perhaps less prepared to be willing to risk and try some new things to see how far they can take their teams each week. Moving to the Indianapolis Colts versus the Cincinnati Bengals, this will be a quick one because the Cincinnati Bengals just, I don't know, did they not even decide that this game was worth playing after that tie they had last week? They did not even show up. I think they went 8 or 9 straight 3-and-outs to start this game. They only went 1 of 13 on third downs overall. They had the fewest first downs of any team this week, the worst early down success rate, the worst third down conversion percentage. They got into the Colts red zone once. They did not convert it. They actually had a goal-to-go situation there and did not convert it. Obviously, they were completely blanked in this game. Andy Dalton, 2.7 yards per pass attempt. Is that even possible? Even more bizarre, they ran for 2.7 yards per rush. 32 total yards rushing on 12 carries. Dalton only completed 47% of his passes. It's hard not to laugh when looking at these statistics because these are epically bad. They punted the ball 11 times during this game. 11 punts. That's pretty ridiculous. That's way more than even what the Jaguars and the Browns were punting in their very low-scoring, defensive, ugly game that they had. So obviously, when you look at the Colts offense, yeah, they did. They played a good game. They played an efficient game. Late in the game, they don't have to do a whole lot. They're already up. They were up by 17 at the end of the third quarter. They obviously won by 27, but it's the way that these Bengals are playing. They're not going to come back and do anything. So they could get a little bit conservative. Still, Andrew Luck 64% completions, 8 yards per pass attempt, 5 yards per rush attempt for the team, 6.5 yards per play. That was the fourth best in the NFL. Very strong number of first downs, 27, and great on early down success rate that allowed them to help continue to pick up those first downs quickly. And they controlled the ball for 40 minutes in this game. The Bengals, with all their punts, only had it for 20 minutes. So this Bengals team, they really, this is like a fighter who got knocked really strongly there against the New England Patriots. And how would they come out after that? They have not shown up. And this upcoming week, they've dropped a couple games now. Obviously, they had the tie in between this loss and the loss to the Patriots, which are both just huge, devastating losses. Now they're at home. Now they're playing the Baltimore Ravens. And I'll have to look and see at the percentages. I'm anxious to see what they're going to be forecasting. We won't know until, I think, Thursday or Friday, what the percentages are for this upcoming game in terms of how big a game is, in terms of playoff chances and odds. Obviously, this Thursday night game between the Chargers and the Broncos is going to be big. But with the Chargers already at 5-2, they could potentially absorb a loss in this spot and still make the playoffs as a wild card team. But it'd be hard pressed to find a way for the Cincinnati Bengals, if they drop in the AFC to 3-3-1 and allow the Ravens to go to 6-2. I don't know that the Bengals would have a shot to make the playoffs. I mean, I'm guessing it'd probably be around 10% or so, especially losing at home to the Ravens. They already beat the Ravens in Baltimore, so that helps. But if you lose at home to the Ravens here, it's really going to be detrimental to that team. So I can't wait to see what the percentages are and how critical that game is. But certainly going to be a must-watch game. Unfortunately, it is at 1 o'clock. Would have loved to see them flex that to 4 o'clock to a late game, but I'd rather see the Oakland versus Cleveland. That game is in Cleveland after all. Just as far east as Cincinnati. I'd rather see that game at 1 o'clock and see the Baltimore-Cincinnati game later in the day. Moving down the page, we're going to jump into the Cowboys versus Giants. Very good NFC East battle here between the Cowboys and the Giants. The key in this game, once again, we'll talk about it's turnovers. Obviously, we know that the Cowboys, very efficient offensively. They could not be stopped by this New York Giants defense. If you look at things that their run game did, what Tony Romo did, once again, they controlled the clock for 34 minutes. Tony Romo, 74% completion. They ran the ball for 5.4 yards per attempt. Romo passed the ball for 11.6 yards per attempt, 134 passer rating, only because he did actually throw an interception, which was sad. But when you look at the Giants, when your defense, when you're playing a team like the Cowboys, and the Cowboys is so efficient, you cannot give them free possessions. And the Giants lost 2 fumbles to the Cowboys. That is not going to allow you to win that game or keep it even close. And we saw they ultimately lost the game by 10 points. Both of these teams were 5 of 5 combined inside of the red zone, so that's how we saw the 51 points here. I think obviously if anybody gets a stop in the red zone, this game does not go over the total. But 100% of the times these teams got in the red zone, they scored touchdowns. That didn't happen in any single other game this weekend, and that's not the normal thing to occur. So that was obviously fortunate for those guys who were backing the over, that everybody just kept scoring touchdowns in there. But Cowboys 64% on third down. This team is just very efficient, and they're just really in this great groove. And in order to knock them off, it's going to be very difficult. The Washington Redskins had a shot on Monday night, and historically, sometimes those games have been interesting, particularly the ones in prime time. But in order for the Redskins to do it, they cannot turn the ball over whatsoever. They absolutely just cannot. And with that defense that they're playing right now, I'd be shocked if they were able to keep this game close enough. You'd like to hope that it's not going to be another one of these primetime blowouts because, as I said last week's podcast, we're just seeing far too many of those. But this Cowboys team is just playing so efficiently right now that you really have to try to do one of two things against them. You either have to play their same game against them, which requires certain skills, but a certain game plan as well. Try to control the ball and slowly work it down the field and have that patience. Or number two, you just have to come out real quick and try to outscore them, try to put that defense on its heels. And even so, the way that Tony Romo is playing right now, his ability to get that team back into games, we saw them do it at St. Louis versus the Rams when they had a bunch of turnovers and got down early. And this is a team that can come back. So it's very, very strange year for the Dallas Cowboys. Did not expect them to be this strong, but they're obviously playing some of the best football going in the NFL right now, at least in the NFC. Moving to the Jaguars and the Browns, a very ugly game here. 6 total turnovers, 3 by each team. If you look at the total yardage in these quarterbacks, first and foremost, we have to just mention that Brian Hoyer, 39% completions, worst in the NFL. 16 completions, 41 pass attempts, 4.8 yards per attempt. Remember that game against the Steelers last week where he only had 8 completions, like 219 yards, and ridiculous yards per catch, like 25 or something. And that's why I was on the Jaguars in this spot. You're not going to be able to. That victory they had over the Steelers of that many points was so overblown and fake by the way that they just put up points in bunches, and the Steelers went 0 for 3 in the red zone. It was just a very fake victory for the Cleveland Browns, and I thought this was a perfect spot to back the Jaguars at home to get their first victory. As I indicated in my write-up, I thought that Brian Hoyer would probably come back to earth a little bit in this game, and certainly a terrible performance by him. Now, Blaine Gabbert went up against a bad Browns defense and really did not impress whatsoever. What impressed was Robinson, the running back. They ran for 5.3 yards per attempt, but Gabbert, 4.9 yards per attempt. That was only 0.1 yards per pass attempts better than Brian Hoyer. So both quarterbacks, terrible numbers on the day. Gabbert threw 3 interceptions and 1 touchdown. So more than enough. He did more than enough to lose this game for that team. But people want to ignore the run game, and the run game's what ultimately kept the Jaguars in this game and allowed them to excel at the end. They're 5.3 yards per rush. They got a number of turnovers, of these turnovers from the Browns, deep in the Browns' territory, which provided for their point production to get it up to 24 points there at the end, because this was a very low-scoring game throughout most of it. It was at 14 points that they threw up there in the fourth quarter. It was only 10-6 heading into the fourth quarter. So this is a game that the Jaguars, it was much closer than the score indicated, and a good spot to really try to look at this thing and maybe go opposite ways on these teams next week, because this was a very fluky victory for the Jaguars. Not that they didn't deserve to win. Overall they did, but the margin of victory makes it appear as if they really crushed the Browns, and they played great defense against the Browns, that's for sure. Held the Browns at 2.3 yards per rush, and obviously Hoyer had a terrible yards per pass attempt. They gained only 3.6 yards per play overall. But at the end of the day, the offense, particularly Blake Bortles, did not do enough to command this 24-6 victory. Jumping to the Lions versus the Saints, this game I anticipated was going to be a lower scoring game, and I anticipated the Saints would fare pretty well, and we were right on both of those accounts. If you look at what the Detroit Lions did without Calvin Johnson in there, they could not run the ball much like they had. They struggled to run the ball last week, 2.5 yards per rush, but they were able to pass the ball a little bit. Stafford, he wasn't great, but he did put up 7.1 yards per pass attempt. That was about average in the league. 68% completions, that was 11th in the league, but he threw 2 interceptions, and he really just struggles without Calvin Johnson in the lineup. I don't want to say even if it's a decoy, because he's got to go out there and do something to stretch the defense and dictate coverages, but he really does struggle a bit without Calvin Johnson out there. And you look at the penalties, it was a sloppy game. The Saints had 12. The Lions had 9. Just overall, very, very sloppy game. Red zone conversions. The Saints only went 1 of 3 inside of the red zone. Lions got down there 4 times, only scored twice. But the biggest problem for me in this game, I was on the Saints and they covered the game, so I didn't care that they did not win. But looking at the Saints in terms of what this loss does to them, this really hampers this team. The positive for them is that there's not a single team in their division with a winning record right now. So the fact that the New Orleans Saints sit there at 2-4, they're looking up at the Carolina Panthers who have 3 wins. They're sitting even with the 2-win Atlanta Falcons, but the Falcons have 5 losses. And then you throw in there that there's also Tampa Bay in that division, who only have 1 win. I think the Saints really have still a shot to do some things, but how in the world does Drew Brees throw that interception late? I mean, in the game to allow the Lions to get the ball and go down and keep that field goal. It just made 0 sense for Brees to actually it was a touchdown, I think, at the end that they put up. But regardless, it made 0 sense for Brees to be throwing the ball in that spot. They need some better play calling, and Brees needs to make some better decision-making late in these games. It seems like you can look at the game up in Cleveland where he played badly at the end. You can look at the game here against the Lions where he just makes some questionable decisions late. And I don't know if that does have to do with his size or if it just has to do with him feeling he has to make a play. But it was a very ill-advised pass, and they need to just think about a little bit more conservatively. The Detroit Lions were not running the ball on them. They were not sustaining drives. They had only put up, I think it was 17 points thus far in the game. So it was not as if the Lions are getting the ball and every time they go down there, they're going to score a touchdown. You can afford to punt there at the end and pin the Lions back and try to stop them with your defense. It's okay to try to do that. So they lost the game. Now they really are in a tough situation because they're facing the Green Bay Packers, who are 5-2 coming off another big win. And we'll talk more about that game when we touch on the games of this upcoming week. The Green Bay Packers hosted the Carolina Panthers in a game that was entertaining, exciting, but a total one-sided ball game in favor of the Green Bay Packers. And I've been strong on the Packers for several weeks now, but I was under the impression that I was going to get a better effort here out of Cam Newton and that offense because I assumed that the Packers would put up their share of points on this Carolina Panthers defense. I like the over in this game as well, but I was definitely surprised at the Carolina Panthers performance, particularly when it comes to passing the ball. Cam Newton was in a real groove entering this game. He had been playing really well, passing numbers year to date, best he's ever had in the NFL. And now he's going up against a Green Bay Packers defense without Sam Shields down there at DB. And a lot of opportunities because this Green Bay Packers defense is not all that great. And he was put under pressure early. They had 3 sacks against him, did the Packers, but 56% completions, only 5.7 yards per attempt. 5.7 yards per attempt was 7th worst of any quarterback this weekend. And you're going up against Aaron Rodgers. That guy put up 10 yards per attempt against the Panthers. You're not going to stay in a game for more than a couple of minutes if you're gaining half the passing yards per pass attempt that the Green Bay Packers are. Now, the Panthers were able to run the ball all right. They ran a little bit better than did the Green Bay Packers, 4.3 yards per attempt. But those passing numbers out of Rodgers and the efficiency, 79% completions, just dwarfed anything that the Panthers could do, given the fact that Cam Newton did not play very well. Add on to that, he threw an interception. These teams were pretty good in the red zone. I mean, they got down there. Packers got down there 4 times, scored 3 touchdowns. The Panthers got down there 3 times, scored 2 touchdowns. So we saw very good red zone efficiency. We also saw very good early on success rate efficiency. This was one of the better games on the board where both teams were bypassing third down quite frequently. Very efficient offensive game plan overall, which is surprising given the fact that Cam Newton's numbers were so poor overall. But it just was a one-sided game, 21-point lead after the first quarter for the Green Bay Packers, and they certainly never looked back. They ended up winning by 21, although that lead grew to 35 points at one point in time toward the end of that game. So that game, pretty simple to talk about. Aaron Rodgers is very good, and Cam Newton struggled. Arizona Cardinals versus the Oakland Raiders. I was definitely impressed with what the Arizona Cardinals did this game because I was somewhat unimpressed with Carson Palmer in his first game back against the Washington Redskins. What I noticed was a lot more shorter passes down the field, a lot more of things closer to the line of scrimmage in his first game back. And I know that Drew Stanton was much more of a gunslinger down the field, and that oftentimes will hit on some big plays, be some incompletions, but it also opened up the run game a lot. And so that's one thing that the Arizona Cardinals could not get going against the Redskins a couple weeks ago. This past week, however, very impressed with what Carson Palmer was able to do down the field. 7.8 yards per attempt for 242 passing yards, only 31 attempts to get him that number, 71% completions, all of those very solid numbers. Now, the run game still could not get back on track for the Arizona Cardinals, only 3.3 yards per carry for 123 total rushing yards, despite running it for 37 attempts. But those passing numbers got them as far as they needed to get in this game, and then it came down to efficiency on third down and efficiency in the red zone. And we know that the Cardinals struggled, particularly with efficiency in the red zone. They only got down to the Raiders' red zone twice, but they scored touchdowns both trips, and they converted 60% of their third down. So both of those numbers, vitally important. They controlled the ball for 37 minutes. That's the fifth largest time disparity between the two teams of any game this past weekend, and that really helped the Arizona Cardinals out in this game. If you look at the Oakland Raiders, that offense, after putting up 28 points against the San Diego Chargers, now at home, could not really do much of anything. If you look at what the quarterback was able to do, Carr, 5.9 yards per attempt, only a passer rating of 74. That's without even throwing an interception. So not very good numbers there. The run game was pretty pathetic as well. 2.9 yards per attempt rushing the ball. That was 27th in the league. So the yards per play was the fifth worst of any team in the league this past weekend. So this offense was not clicking like it was the prior week against the Chargers. Does that speak more to the Chargers defense than the Cardinals defense, or does that speak to a bad game from the quarterback? Probably a combination of the above, which will make it interesting for Peyton Manning when he plays the San Diego defense this upcoming weekend, because certainly that defense allowed the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend to put on a pretty efficient performance with Alex Smith. Not great, but efficient. And obviously we know what Carr did last weekend, scoring 28 points against them. So that should be very interesting as a discussion topic when we talk about the San Diego-Denver game on Thursday. Seahawks and Rams. This game, actually, you might have thought that this game would probably be one of the uglier, uneventful games of the weekend. Not too much intrigue, but not only was there intrigue just seeping out of this game, but both the teams were extremely efficient. If you look at it, both of them were top 7 in early down success rate. That was the best early down success rate game of the entire weekend. Both teams were able to bypass third downs frequently. They were pretty good on third downs as well, top 10. Not great, but top 10. And when they got into the red zone, you think about what the Seattle Seahawks defense has become, and that's the big question, because they allowed the Rams down there 3 times. The Rams scored touchdowns every single trip down there. Now, I've been telling you guys on here for the entire season about Austin Davis ever since he came in against Tampa Bay week 2 and played extremely efficiently. Austin Davis went 19 of 22 in this game. That's 86% completion, 7.7 yards per attempt. Don't focus on the passing yards themselves, 170, because he only completed 19 passes. But what you should focus on is the efficiency that he played with. 0 sacks, 0 interceptions, an 86% completion percentage, and going 7.7 yards down the field. All of those numbers is exactly what helped the Rams to get this victory. But once again, people are under this impression. It's so easy for people to just think about prior years and think that what they're seeing this year is just a fluke, that this isn't really the way that this team is. And I don't understand why people do that. I think it's because they don't spend enough time, like we're doing here, really breaking these teams down every single week to get an understanding of who this team really is. But the Rams are not a running team, and they're not a defensive team like they were last year. Their defense was not even that great last year, but they were better defensively than offensively. Sam Bradford held that offense back, and if you want to disagree with me on that point, though not many people actually do, that's fine. But the fact is that Austin Davis is very efficient throwing the ball down the field and is playing at an extremely high level, well above what Sam Bradford has done in St. Louis for years. And they are finally able to push the ball down the field and allow that run game to do what it needs to do, instead of just completely carrying the team. And if they can't get the run game going, they're going to lose. Here, Austin Davis, if you look at the Rams, they only ran for 3.8 yards per carry, 19th in the league. They allowed the Seahawks to run for 5.9 yards per carry. If you ever it'd be interesting to look back. If the Rams ever allowed the Seahawks to run for 5.9 yards per carry, and the Rams themselves only ran for 3.8, how many games the Rams actually won? I'd be very shocked if it was very many. But in this case, Austin Davis carried this team. Now, of course, they had that incredible non-offensive touchdown, that punt return. Tremendous coaching, as I mentioned off the top, turning that game around to a large extent. Much more demoralizing than just a standard punt return touchdown, in my opinion. But the Seahawks, it's not as if their offense played very bad. We know that this Rams defense struggles. That is a fact. The Seahawks, 25 first downs in this game. That was third best in the league. Fourth best early down success rate. Fifth best third down conversion rate. Stop me when you hear a bad number here. 60% inside the red zone. They got into the Rams red zone 5 times, scored 3 touchdowns. The quarterback, Russell Wilson, threw for 8.1 yards per attempt, 64% completions. They ran the ball 29 times for 171 rushing yards. That was the 5.9 yards per attempt was second best in the league out of all the teams. They had a total of average of 6.8 yards per play. That average was the third best in the league this past week. So they were extremely strong overall. What killed this team? How did they ultimately lose? Because they had no turnovers. So the way that they lost this game was twofold. Number one, 10 penalties. 10 penalties, only 2 on the Rams. And number 2, the non-offensive touchdown, the punt return. That pretty much was where the game was lost. It was from those 2 situations combined with the fact that the Seahawks team defensively was not playing very well. And the question obviously should arise, is this really what they are? Well, they've lost some players, injuries to right at linebacker, and we're seeing teams try to attack them more through the air. Hint, that's what I was talking about the team should be trying to do for much of the season. I was mentioning that, and Austin Davis obviously was able to do that. That's what the Rams like to do. And so this is a very, very strong performance, very strong win for the Rams. Hopefully something to build upon. I don't know how many wins this team is going to earn this season. They're sitting at 2-4. They're obviously not really in playoff contention, but I'm just happy for the team and for the city to see that they are finally getting some excitement there. Not just that they're winning these close, low-scoring games, but hopefully they'll continue to have a few of these victories where they're able to be like a spoiler, kind of a dark horse there to upset some teams. And if Austin Davis plays well, it'll just be something good for that city, I think. And so definitely a good win for the Rams there. And the Seahawks, it was the fact that their defense isn't playing all that well, and coupled with the penalties and the punt return. That's pretty much what decided this game, because it was a very close game for much of the beginning and the end. Of course, the Rams jumped out to an 18-point lead there, and so really took the Seahawks to struggle and scratch and claw their way back into the game, ultimately losing by 2 points and falling just short. But a very fun game to watch. Obviously, it's always fun to watch a defending Super Bowl champ. Unless you're a fan of that team, it's always fun to watch that team lose the next year, in my opinion, just because I like watching underdogs and I like seeing upsets. So I thought that was a pretty entertaining game to watch. Moving down to the second of our last 2 games here, the Ravens versus the Falcons. You look at the Ravens here. They won this game in a landslide, 29-7. The game was 17 points at halftime, so not very close at that point in time. But my main concern here is Joe Flacco and this Ravens team did throw 2 interceptions, had 1 fumble loss. They had 3 turnovers. The fact that they still won the game 27-9, despite losing the turnover battle by 2 turnovers, is a big deal. Number one, it shows that they don't have those turnovers. They would have crushed this Falcons team even worse. But number 2, they need to correct that before they go on the road this week against the Cincinnati Bengals, because I don't care how the Bengals have been playing the last couple of weeks, the last 3 weeks to be exact. If you turn the ball over on the road in Cincinnati in division, you are not going to get very far. And so Joe Flacco at home is usually better than on the road. If he's throwing a couple interceptions, that's a bit of a warning flag moving forward on the road in this game. So I'm going to be very interested to see how he plays in Cincinnati, how conservative or aggressive he is with his passes, and what the result ends up being there. Now, he threw the ball down the field. 9.9 yards per attempt. To go 9.9 yards per attempt and still have 64% completions, obviously that's very strong. We know that obviously Peyton Manning had numbers like that this week. He was 11.3 yards per attempt and 81% completions. We know, for instance, Dallas Cowboys and Tony Romo performed just like that this past weekend as well. And of course, so did Aaron Rodgers. So it's not like Joe Flacco was out of this world with that performance, but still a very strong performance from Joe when he was completing passes. But he needs to eliminate those mistakes, as I think we all know. The team could not really run the ball against the Falcons, only 3.4 yards per carry, so they're going to have to improve upon that when they go out to Cincinnati, looking at these games as building blocks. But Matt Ryan, an abysmal 4.2 yards per pass attempt, only 186 yards on 44 attempts. That's ridiculous, Matt Ryan. 82 passer rating, 21st in the league. His 4.2 yards per attempt was second worst to any quarterback this week. The only quarterback who was worse was actually Andy Dalton. So you got 2 quarterbacks there who got contracts, who got some money, who just played terribly this past weekend. You look at their overall yards per play, 3.9 yards per play for the Atlanta Falcons. That is very bad. And you look at the third down conversion rate, 27% on third down, the 27th rated early down success rate. It's just a bad game for the Atlanta Falcons. Now they have to go. We already mentioned that they're one of these teams that's already lost a couple of games in a row, looked bad, failed to rebound. Now you're going to have to go to face the Detroit Lions over in London, a very difficult spot for these Atlanta Falcons, and they will get a bye after this week. That's the one positive. But the second positive is they don't have to face Calvin Johnson over there, most likely. The Lions should just rest him and get him back 100%. But this team is in disarray after starting the season. Okay, they've really fallen off the tracks here. Their defense can't stop anybody. Their offensive line is all on injured reserve. Matt Ryan can't get any protection. It's just a sad situation to watch injuries dismantle an offense and a defense to a large extent that way. But it is what it is. That's the NFL. Last game of the day, Washington Redskins versus Tennessee Titans. Not a very entertaining game to watch at any means, so we won't spend much time on it. What can we learn from this game? Well, the Redskins won the game 19-17. It was a back-and-forth type game, tied after the first quarter. Redskins trailed by 4 at halftime, got up by 3, and ended up winning by 2 from the third quarter into the fourth quarter. If you look at the Redskins in terms of the yards per pass attempt, 5th best. Now, they did bench Cousins, which I thought was maybe it was a deserved move, and certainly they wanted to get this victory, and so they made a move in this game, but it really took away anything that you could do with Cousins in terms of trying to trade him for anything of value. Not that he'd be viewed as highly valuable given some of his decision-making, but he can throw a pretty good ball. It's just his decision-making is pretty atrocious at key moments in games. So maybe nobody would have wanted him anyways, but he does have a better arm than a lot of the guys who have backup jobs around the NFL. Look at the turnovers, sloppy. Each team had 2 turnovers, 1 fumble, 1 interception for both of them. Redskins got down to the red zone of the Titans 4 times and did not score a single touchdown. So they should have and could have won by more. They just were not very efficient whatsoever in the red zone. The worst performance on the day by far of any team. In fact, no team who got down to the red zone at least 3 times failed to convert at least once. The Redskins got down there 4 times and failed to convert all 4 into touchdowns. So how are you going to beat Dallas if you even get down to the red zone 4 times and walk away with no touchdowns? That's not going to happen. So they need to get that cleaned up before their game on Monday night for certain. But overall, the Redskins' performance, 27% on third down. If you think about takeaways and what this team needs to do to beat the Dallas Cowboys, I gave you kind of like a blueprint, high level, what teams should do to try to hang in there with the Cowboys. Now, obviously, if you're the Denver Broncos or one of these really elite teams, you would have a different game plan. But for the average team, it's pretty standard. The Redskins are not executing at that level to allow them to do that. Their yards per pass attempt was great in this game, but by not converting on third down, first of all, they didn't have a great early down success rate, 18. So they get to third down a lot. They only go 27% on third down. Neither of those statistics were very strong. They got down to the red zone 4 times, didn't score a single touchdown. So all these things kind of snowball and lead to the fact that is not going to get them a victory. They need to become much more efficient on offense, stay out on the field, try to control time of possession, and ultimately put up points when they get down in the red zone. They did none of that in this game against the Tennessee Titans. And Tennessee, they're just as lost about their quarterback position as the Washington Redskins are. I really think it's time to let them try Mettenberger back there, give him a shot. Obviously, he's young, but the reality is, where are you going this year? You're in the same division as the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans, both of which are vastly superior to you. You're not going to bypass the Indianapolis Colts unless Luck gets hit by a pickup truck. It's just not going to happen. So Tennessee needs to go ahead and give their young quarterback a start and try to let him, maybe not against the Houston Texans team, but that and J.J. Watt, let him. The secondary can certainly be passed on, but unless he's processing his decision-making quickly enough, he'll probably take a few hits, and that might not be the best move this upcoming week. But I would like to see him get in there because, obviously, Whitehurst is a career backup. He's not doing anything at all for this team. No, absolutely 0 points in letting that guy take another snap for you. To me, it's either Locker, because you want to just make sure he's not the guy for you, or it's Mettenberger, and you want to see what the kid can do. If Locker's banged up, you got to go with Mettenberger. I have no reason to see why they're wasting their time. Quarterback is the most important position on a team. You got to figure out if you have one, if you trust one on your team. And this is really a proving ground for next season. We know they're not doing anything this year. So is Mettenberger the guy? Is Locker the guy? They got to figure that out. It's pointless to keep letting Charlie Whitehurst get in there and take snaps. A lot of injuries to talk through, so let's get to it. Atlanta Falcons lost center Peter Kuntz to knee surgery. He's out for the season. That offensive line is completely ravaged at this point. Sort of feel bad for them, but that's football, obviously, and they're not going to be able to win very much without an offensive line. Baltimore Ravens lost the offensive lineman as well. Morgan Cox, he's out for the season. Another knee issue for him. Buffalo Bills, both of their running backs, C.J. Spiller, Fred Jackson, are out. Spiller looking at maybe they'll return in Week 16. Jackson's out for several weeks with a groin injury, looking to call up Bryce Brown and help their running back situation, but they need to produce to help Kyle Orton out. Carolina Panthers, 2 offensive linemen dealing with injuries. Byron Bell with elbow, Try Turner with a knee, both listed as week to week, I think, at this point, so we'll see if they're ready to play this upcoming weekend. Looking down, next big injury, Chicago Bears, Kyle Fuller. He has a hip injury. He's listed as day-to-day, so I haven't seen anything indicating he's not going to play this weekend, but he's their best defensive player right now, I think, particularly in the back 7, so he's obviously important. Cincinnati Bengals got a threesome of injuries here. A.J. Green, will he be back from his toe injury? He says he wants to play against the Ravens in this huge divisional spot. Vontaze Burfict, he was out with a concussion for several games, and now he is listed with a neck stinger and day-to-day. Sometimes that kind of presents itself as a neck stinger, but really has head issues associated with it. So we'll have to see what his status is. And then Leon Hall, defensive back, he's got some back issues and listed as day-to-day. The Lions are headed over to London. Reggie Bush has an ankle injury. Their other running back, Theo Riddick, has a hamstring. They're both listed day-to-day. We'll see what happens with them. James Starks for the Packers, ankle injury day-to-day. The guy who's not day-to-day is unfortunately Jacksonville Jaguars' Paul Posluszny, their linebacker. He is out for the season, tore his pectoral muscle, so he is done for the year. The New Orleans Saints got a few injuries to worry about heading into their big game against the Green Bay Packers that they really got to win at home. Dear Thomas is definitely out with a shoulder injury for a few weeks. And then Glenn Foster, defensive lineman, tore his knee up. He's out for the season. Roderick Bunkley suffered a concussion, so will he be able to play or won't he? He'll be in the concussion protocol, but that's two defensive linemen potentially out for the Saints. At least one of them will be. The New York Giants, John Beeson, he's out indefinitely with a toe injury they've been dealing with. And they have Colin Jenkins, defensive lineman. His status is uncertain. He suffered a calf injury. The Oakland Raiders lost Usama Young, defensive back. He's out for the season, tore his knee up. A lot of guys tearing up their knees. Darren Sproles, his knee, they're off a bye. Philadelphia Eagles. Will he be able to play this upcoming weekend in their game out in Arizona? We'll have to see. He's listed as day-to-day. Moving down to the San Diego Chargers, they got this big game against Denver Broncos on Thursday. Unfortunately, Brandon Flowers suffered a concussion in their last game. So to turn around to play on Thursday, I could imagine that is going to be almost impossible for him to be out there, which is a big boon for Peyton Manning and the passing attack for the Denver Broncos, but that's still far from being determined yet, so pay attention to that developing story. The 49ers lost guard Daniel Kilgore for the season with an ankle injury, so they are down, and another offensive lineman they're going to have to deal with, so it's going to be even more of a struggle for them to run the ball. We'll have to see how they get by with that. Looking at the St. Louis Rams, defensive back Janoris Jenkins hurt his knee in the last game against the Seahawks. Will he be able to play next week? What's the status of the knee injury? I'm not sure at this point in time. Some might think it's better if he doesn't play because he's just such a liability in coverage, but it makes you wonder who they have to replace him. Is probably no better, maybe even worse. And last but not least, Washington Redskins lost linebacker Brian Orakpo for the season. This guy, there's not enough really to describe the impact of him at linebacker and D'Angelo Hall in the secondary for the Redskins. These two guys getting good money and producing absolutely zilch for the Washington Redskins. Both of them are now out for the season. You probably won't even notice that they're missing because they don't really do much anyways. That wraps up the injuries. Let's run through this card really quick. San Diego at Denver, Thursday Night Football, one of the best matchups of the weekend. Gets started early in the week. This is, aside from the Philadelphia Eagles, Arizona Cardinals, this is the matchup that has the teams with the most likely chance of making the playoffs, the best records going head-to-head. It's a divisional game to boot, so I'm really looking forward to this game. The Chargers know how to beat the Denver Broncos. Can they execute that game plan again? They've beat them in Denver already once last season. Can they get it done again? Should be fascinating to watch. If they are able to pull out the outright upset, it's going to be huge for that division because it spins it up on its head. Denver would now be not favored to advance because the Chargers get to host the Broncos later in the season. They already have one victory over them, and at 6-2, that's a better record than the Broncos would be at 5-2. Extremely difficult to get that accomplished, and who knows what the long-term projections in terms of strength of schedule. We'd have to check with NFLproject.com to get a better feel for that. I still think both these teams are headed to the playoffs, barring some type of injury to one of their quarterbacks. Next game up is on the rotation board is the Detroit Lions versus the Atlanta Falcons in London. Keep in mind, guys, this game is at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 a.m. in Vegas. So that's going to be a very early start. Grab your coffee, get up early, watch Matt Ryan run for his life on the turf over there in London. Should be a game that I don't really know what we're going to see. If the Lions don't have Calvin Johnson in there, certainly they're less explosive. We know that the Falcons don't really bring it on either side of the ball. Now beat up more at the offensive line. We just keep sending these gems over to London. I'm sure they appreciate the favors, but well, we'll see. Both these teams, at least they get a team who's 5-2 this season, as opposed to the Miami Dolphins when they played the Raiders over there earlier in the year. Both teams were really struggling. At least they got see some good stuff from the Miami Dolphins. We'll see if this is a one-sided affair as well, or if the Atlanta Falcons put up a fight. The best games at 1 o'clock Eastern, definitely look no further than the Cincinnati Bengals hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Will A.J. Green play? Big question. Baltimore has to go on the road and play a team that already beat them once this season, so they've got revenge on their mind. They also are playing in a very difficult spot for them because Joe Flacco typically plays worse on the road. He already threw a couple interceptions last week at home to the Atlanta Falcons, so he's got to have that in the back of his mind somewhat. And as bad as Cincinnati's looked the last couple of weeks, you can't turn the ball over there and expect to come away with a victory. So you got to be careful holding on to the ball for the Baltimore Ravens. But Cincinnati reeling the last few weeks, 3 weeks to be exact, they have not had a win. After starting out the season undefeated, everybody thought, hey, this might be the team, just like they thought for a little while, hey, the Giants might be the team. Both those teams have dropped really, really far down the board to probably everybody's power rankings out there, and it's going to be fascinating to see this game because Cincinnati, while they could technically still make the playoffs, of course, at this stage in the season, if they drop this game at home to the Baltimore Ravens, would have to get there as a wild card seed because the Ravens would be at 6-2 and the Bengals would be 3-3. Very difficult to catch up on those 3 games. But it is possible. Then you look at a game that's featuring NFC opponents, not divisional opponents, but teams who have met past couple of seasons, and that's the Seattle Seahawks versus the Carolina Panthers. Except in this case, while both these teams have 3 wins and 3 losses each, this is not the same type of matchup that we've seen in the past. Neither of these defenses have played very well this season, have played very well the last couple of weeks, and both these teams really need a victory. Both these teams have not won in a few weeks, very similar to to the last game that we were talking about with the Cincinnati Bengals. So both these teams need to get back on track. Huge test. Tough for Seattle, though. They're on the road at 1 o'clock Eastern, early game for them. They were on the road last week as well against the Rams in an early game. So very difficult spot for them. We'll be really interested to see how the run game performs and how Russell Wilson does when called upon. I want to see if Cam Newton bounces back. Also, if his bad performance up in Green Bay, if he get things rolling against the Seattle Seahawks at home in a game, they gotta win because they are in prime position right now to take over that NFC South. With all these teams in that division struggling, and we'll touch on the Saints in a minute, that's a game that they have a lot of opportunities. If they can somehow win this game, they are home underdogs. It's going to go a long way for their season. So those are the best games at 1 o'clock. Let's talk about a couple other games that have some intrigue, but not for both teams. Here it's just more of one-sided intrigue. I'm interested to see how the Chicago Bears respond. Brandon Marshall called out this team, precisely called out Jay Cutler, though not directly. I disagree with the move of publicly throwing a teammate under the bus, so he didn't refer to him by name. He basically said, everybody on my team, and he listed every single guy's name, is good. And he never listed Jay Cutler's name, so infer what we will from that. Obviously, he wants Jay Cutler to play a little bit better. And that's going to be interesting for him to do because, look, Geno Smith actually didn't play terribly against the New England Patriots last week. This offense of the Bears is more than capable of producing in New England. So I certainly think that there is a shot for the Bears in this game. I don't think it's worthy of being a 7-point underdog that they're currently being given, but the defense has not yet had the opportunity to really be exposed, I think, for what they are. When they played a really good team like the Green Bay Packers, we saw what Green Bay was able to do to them. And the Miami Dolphins, I don't think anybody's going to say that this is one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL. They are a very efficient and very strong offense, though. It's kind of under the radar. My EDSR statistic really likes this offense tremendously. But I don't know that the New England Patriots are a team that's going to have a lot of trouble moving the ball against the Chicago Bears defense. But that said, the New England Patriots offense is not the same as it's been, but it is really trending upward. So I'm interested to see this matchup. I don't really see the Bears doing anything this season, but this is going to be interesting game to see how it develops. Then you take a look at the Buffalo Bills versus the New York Jets. Not a lot of intrigue here because it's a division rivalry, a clash like that, but I don't really expect a whole lot from the Bills this year. They are somehow 4-3. I don't think their offense, it's interesting. The inclusion of Kyle Orton has made their passing game a lot more efficient from a completion percentage perspective, but he seems to be fumbling and turning the ball over far too much, and this team really hasn't taken that next step that you thought they could take once he got inserted there. Yeah, they do have a winning record, but they're without a couple of their running backs now, so they're going up against a Jets team who can stuff the run. It's going to be up to Kyle Orton to get it done on the road. I think that's the biggest intrigue for me is watching Orton try to get things done against this New York Jets defense. Obviously, you got Percy Harvin getting worked into the mix. We'll have to see how much he plays and how well that chemistry develops in his first game, but certainly interesting to see games. I'm going to kind of overlook here, not really say much more than a couple words. Miami at Jacksonville. Miami off a big win, now favored on the road in Jacksonville, 5.5 points. Battle of Sunshine State. We'll see what happens there. Houston, Tennessee, not too interesting to me. No point in discussing it. Minnesota, Tampa Bay, same thing here. Two teams headed downwards. Minnesota with that tough loss last week in come-from-behind fashion up in Buffalo, where their offense played terribly. I don't even know how they were in that game, to be honest with you. Bridgewater, a very poor performance, so they need to show up in a big way. And unfortunately, they do get a bad Tampa Bay defense to try to show up against. Moving to the 4 o'clock games. Again, not sure why the NFL wants to give us 3 4 o'clock games, especially this game where the Cleveland Browns are hosting the Oakland Raiders. I mean, get realistic. Who wants to watch that game at all unless you're from Cleveland or Oakland, particularly when you've got games like Indianapolis and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Arizona? Why not? I mean, if I was controlling things, I'd flex out the Ravens and the Bengals to 4 o'clock as well. Get rid of this game with Cleveland taking on the Oakland Raiders. I can understand if it's in Oakland. It's not. It's in Cleveland. This game should not be at 4 o'clock. It makes no sense whatsoever. Looking at these 4 o'clock games with that do matter, that should be interesting. Philadelphia and Arizona, we've seen these non-divisional NFC rivals go at it for a few years now. I always like watching these two teams play. I mean, obviously it used to be Andy Reid calling the shots, but Bruce Arians, he's got a little bit of Andy Reid to an extent. He's a pretty aggressive play caller. Obviously you got Chip Kelly. He's an aggressive play caller too. So I'm interested to see how these teams go. I will say, while you think that both these teams are aggressive offensively, they are number 32 and 31 in the league in red zone efficiency, red zone conversions. They have not played very well inside the red zone, so that is one thing to pay attention to when you're talking about these two offenses. And but otherwise, I think it's going to be a fascinating game, and I think it's going to come down to, obviously we talk about turnovers. I'm not going to really mention turnovers because turnovers will decide every single game probably if you let them, but I think it's going to come down to who executes in the red zone in this one because both teams have been so bad. If one team can get hot down there, I think that's the team that's going to get this one, but at a short 2.5 point favorite for the Cardinals, I think it's going to be a very fun game to watch. Similarly, Indianapolis at Pittsburgh here, you got a short 2.5 road favorite in the Colts. I have said before, Pittsburgh does not deserve to be 4-3. It's a bad team. It's a bad team that was exposed in the first, let's say, 18 minutes of that game against the Houston Texans. It's a team that was exposed the entire second half against the Houston Texans. They had one good stretch of a few minutes of high efficiency play and turnovers that helped them get that win on Monday night, but that's about it. And if you think about what this team has done before that, not a whole lot. I mean, they went down and they barely beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. They lost at home to another Florida team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I struggle with this Pittsburgh Steelers team. But that said, Indianapolis is in a tough spot. They're on the road Also, it's a huge win at home. How do you get up for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road? You're playing outdoors, much different than playing in your dome, playing against an opponent who, let's face it, I don't think the Steelers are very good, but look at the rest of the division that the Indianapolis Colts typically play their games against. When you talk about Jacksonville Jaguars, when you talk about the Tennessee Titans, certainly the Pittsburgh Steelers are no worse than those teams, and better. So, it isn't like they've got a cakewalk here. It's going to be tough, especially as a road favorite, to get it accomplished. But it'll be interesting to see the battle of Andrew Luck versus Ben Roethlisberger. I think that's what's going to get all the hype heading into this game. But the reality is, I really want to see how this Indianapolis Colts defense plays against this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, because let's think about this for a moment. The Indianapolis Colts have already played the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals. Granted, they played both those teams in Indianapolis. They held those two AFC North opponents of the Steelers to a total of 10 points. I believe the Ravens scored 10, and the Bengals obviously scored nothing. So this defense is surprising and shocking a lot of these AFC North teams. Granted, they did it at home. How would they do it on the road against Pittsburgh, whose offense has struggled? Despite that point production on the scoreboard, I will call to mind that those are off of turnovers for the most part. Steelers very bad in red zone offense this season, and they got the ball given to them at the 8-yard line and the 3-yard line of the Houston Texans on Monday night. They scored touchdowns on both of those trips, obviously in just one play and then a couple of plays on those drives. When the only other time they even got into the red zone, they had one actual drive where they started without getting those two turnovers. If they even made it into the red zone, and they did not convert a touchdown. So, you got to keep all those things in mind. Just because they put up a bunch of points does not mean the team has turned a corner offensively. Then you look at, I'm not even going to talk about this Oakland-Cleveland game, the Sunday night game, fascinating matchup. Certainly, I think, from a skill level, an entertainment level, point production level, and a team backed up level, this is the game of the weekend that, I think Sunday Night Football on NBC is really happy that they got this game. Drew Brees backed up in a hole at home on primetime in his dome. It gets no better than this. This team has got to get a win. They host Aaron Rodgers, the high-powered Green Bay Packers offense. I can't wait to see this game, and I just think it's going to be fascinating because there's all sorts of storylines that the media usually likes to hype up, and I tend to try to ignore most of those because I think they're fluff and they hype up the things that's going to get them the most ratings. But in this particular case, I really think this game, I think there should be a lot more pressure on Drew Brees than what people give him credit for. He has really thrown some bad interceptions in the fourth quarter of games. He cost them the game against the Lions. He threw the interception against the Buccaneers in that game that they luckily eked out a win in overtime, so they didn't have one win so far on the season. This New Orleans Saints team, truthfully, is far too talented to be a team that, if they lose this game, if they get upset, they are the favorite team. If they lose this game, they'll drop to 2-5 on the season against some questionable opposition, some good opposition, but also some questionable opposition. And one of their wins was in overtime. It's going to be tough if they don't win this game. And I think the NFLProject.com metrics or algorithm percentages are going to say that this game is of vital importance for the New Orleans Saints in terms of their division standings. And given the fact that the Detroit Lions are breathing down the neck of the Green Bay Packers in that division, both those teams are 5-2. One of them is going to emerge as a champion of the division, and one of them is going to emerge probably as a wild card team if everything goes right for them. I think this game is probably, in addition to the Cincinnati Bengals game, probably going to be the one that has the most playoff implications. We'll have to see, but I can't wait to see what those numbers say when I get them, I think on Thursday afternoon, and I'll share them with you as soon as I get them. But that'll be fascinating. Then on Monday night, you got the Washington Redskins versus the Dallas Cowboys. Do the Redskins have the formula to beat the Cowboys? Probably not. Could they get lucky? Maybe. If they get some turnovers, it's just going to be difficult. RG3 is not going to – I don't think he's going to play. We'll have to see. And you got Colt McCoy back there. Many far better quarterbacks have gone against the Cowboys this season and not earned a win. Colt McCoy and this Redskins defense does not bring a lot of confidence to the table if you're trying to take this team to think that they're going to be able to steal a win in Dallas. But more importantly, is it just going to be more of the same for the Dallas Cowboys against this Washington Redskins team? You don't really have to overextend yourself too much. You just need to avoid mistakes, which is something that the Cowboys have been doing very well. If you keep executing on third down, chewing up the clock, the Redskins are going to just give you this game. You don't have to do anything crazy, and I don't think the Cowboys will. I think it's going to be more the same from them. The real question then comes, what does the Redskins try to do offensively to excite this offense? They have the playmakers at receiver and tight end. I think their skill positions are better, well better than the average NFL team. When you talk about Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Andre Roberts, Jordan Reed, their tight ends, they're Alfred Morris. They've got talent there. Their offensive line isn't great, and the biggest problem has obviously been the quarterback. On that side of the ball, defensively, they're a mess. So that's why I don't think you're going to need to do a lot if you're Jason Garrett. Just make sure your team shows up, doesn't have a letdown spot, and obviously Monday night prime time at home. It's going to be hard to imagine they would. I think the Cowboys should be able to get it done at home. So that would wrap up the Week 8 slate in the NFL. After this week, we still have over half the season left, so that's the positive. We're not even past or to the halfway mark yet. So season so far has been really exciting. Looking forward to seeing what the remaining weeks have in store for us. We'll catch up with you next week.
This is going to be a fun ride. This is going to be a fun ride. Everybody one clap. I'm going to play when I want to play. what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. Take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody, one clap, one clap, one clap, one clap.